for the same thing, and that we applaud at the right time, and as Dr. Cross said, we put up our hands at the right time once we're well educated, and the rest of it. But that's not enough. The reality of the situation is that when the people were baptized in the River Jordan, and they came up out of the River Jordan, and they spoke to John the Baptist, the question that came was, what then must we do? What then must we do? How shall we live? And I believe that we are called, when we are building up a civilization, a culture, to recognize that it is not just personal decisions. It's the question of being able to say, what do we want as a culture? What do we want as a civilization? Hypothetically, if a priest, let's say, who was a director of the Priests for Life, was asked to speak to a bunch of bishops, just hypothetically, and you brought up questions, and somebody brought up a question to me, and I said, well, here's my question to you. What do you want? What do you really, really want? To quote those great philosophers, the Spice Girls. What do you really, really want? Okay. Well, there's something to be said for it. And I would posit to you, do you have 20 legislative things that you want? Because the bishops haven't so far. Now, hopefully they'll be challenged to that. What 20 legislative things do you want? Because when I talk to members of provincial parliaments and legislatures and members of federal parliament, they say, but you're so sort of chaotic about what you want. You want one big thing. Tell us what we can do legislatively. What does it mean to be able to have a society where women are actually supported in having children? What does it mean where we can be able to actually think about, once again, having a living wage for people so that a father can actually have a wage and be able to support a family on one wage? Think about that without having to just, get all your basic bargains at Value Village. I mean, the reality of the situation is, what does it mean when we talk about matters about credits for children, when we desperately need children? What does it mean for us to be able to say, how do we encourage people to get and to stay married legislatively? What does it mean when we talk about people who, when they opt out of the workforce, are paying for it with their pensions? Why do we have a third of our elderly women, right? We need to be able to be clear about this and say, if we want a civilization, then any civilization, every future, as John Paul II said in Familiaris Consortio, every future comes by way of the family. And we need to be able to have that. A truly pro-family set of legislative proposals to stop and say, what do I need? What would make my life better so that I could be able to have a fuller life, so I could encourage people and others could be encouraged so that they can be able to have the support of what makes us fully social beings, our society. And that's not impossible because the Lord brings everything around, He brings around the possibilities that we are able to look to say, what does it mean that we can be able to have a whole society that truly supports families and not just is going to be social engineering? When I was sent off to study moral theology, my brother Danny said, well, that's going to be an easy thing to teach. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you just walk into a class and write no on the board and that's it. Okay, you're Catholics, aren't you? No, that's not true. I believe that yes, every yes is also a no. But we have to be people who will say yes to life. To be able to say yes, arising from our fears. Yes, arising from our limitations. A yes to be able to say that we can be able to build this culture. It's said that when the Israelites came back from Babylon, they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem with a sword in one hand and a trowel in another. And we have that sword of truth and righteousness. And we have a trowel to be able to build up those bricks, which are the very living stones who are the souls of the people gathered here and the people to whom we are sent, so that we can build up this civilization on a strong foundation to be able to bring it to the world, to be able to say this too can be a city shining on the hilltop, a city whose truth and whose life will not and cannot be hidden. This is what we have. A treasure that once buried, when unburied, will draw people to itself as surely as people are drawn to truth, to goodness, to light, to the jewels which we hold and that which we are given for others. Thank you.
I'll take it up. So, Father, are you open for some questions? Okay. I'll walk around with the wireless that we had, and we'll...
This is the worst time for a speaker waiting for questions. Anyway. I've said this before, but I know I speak very quickly, and so that's an understatement. I was giving a lecture one time, and one of the students, he was racing along trying to keep up with me. I said, okay, now we'll have a break. And he put down his pencil and went, oh. Yes?
Father, thank you for such a great presentation, and I've got more of a comment, I think, than actually a question. I agree with you that conferences like this are a great start, but I also think that if we really want to get the message across, we have to start changing the way we look at our marriage prep courses, because I remember
they suck. They're not marriage prep courses. I couldn't agree more. I hate to interrupt, but let's be honest. They're not marriage preparation courses. You cannot take people from our society. It's not their fault they're in our society, because we're all where we are. But that you cannot effect a change in people by one single weekend, short of a sheer act of God. Father Joe Hattie, who should be known to many of you, and I think is one of the pioneers in this, Father Joe Hattie was very clear when he talked about marriage and family formation. And here's one of the problems. You get your child baptized, and then nobody misses you again. You don't show up at Mass again, and nobody ever misses you. So you're obviously not too important for the community. You get married, and nobody misses you again. You see? So what does that say about you, that nobody even misses me? Isn't that something? That's sad, eh? And so nobody cares enough to even come visiting. Even they don't care enough to go for the sheep that's lost in the wilderness. And why do we believe in the Bo Peep syndrome? Leave them alone and they'll come home wagging their tails behind them. That's not true. It's not true. It's just not. So, come to grips with the fact that you must take over the commanding heights of education within the church. One of the major things is you must take over marriage preparation and completely reform it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think in my situation, they probably spent probably 10% of the marriage prep on sex, and out of that 10%, probably 2 or 3% was on natural family planning. So there was almost no attention to natural family planning, and everything else was on. We kind of suggest that you don't use natural form or.
Yeah. So I would agree. I mean, I just think that it's been brought up a number of times, and I couldn't agree more that as an area of basic education, and at a time, believe it or not, when people are relatively open, they want the best. They know shacking up is shacking up. You build a shack and not a home, and it's okay for a summer on the beach, but when the winter wind blows, it's not much, And I can go down the line too. Trial marriages, who wants to be on trial, right? And who's the judge, jury, and executioner? It's pack your bags, the party's over. And I can go down the list of why shacking up and everything is wrong. It makes for a very interesting sermon. I'll tell you, boy, people shape up and listen. But people want the best. They really do. They don't want a disaster in their marriage. Of course they don't. Come on, they're not masochists. So I think it really is a time that we can look at. But you got to throw out the old way. That's so 60s. It just hasn't worked. So get over it.
Hi, Father Tom. Being an academic, I know you won't mind a quotation. This comes from an article in the October 2008 Homiletic and Pastoral Review entitled Humanae Vitae at 40. The desire not to seem out of step with current attitudes has brought silence from parents. The desire not to lose popularity has brought silence from pulpits. So with the possible exception of the parish of St. Joseph in Douro, Ontario, why are we not hearing, I can't remember